Hi, good evening and good afternoon. This is Jim Gerson from CareStack. You're in the right place. Thank you for joining us. Kara Kelly will be presenting in a moment or so on management myths and fateful fallacies. That's our CE program this evening in conjunction with Darby Dental. And Kara, I'm going to give it about another 30 seconds or so, and then we'll get started if that works for you. Can you hear me okay?
I can. Sounds perfect. Thanks, Jim.
And your background looks so cool. If that was real, it looks real. That's pretty impressive.
No, I wish it were real. That would be nice, but no, I just got tired of cleaning my desk, so I have to have a virtual background.
Awesome. So this program would not be possible tonight without the support of our close partner, Darby Dental, making this possible, bringing this program to you in a complimentary fashion. And my colleague, Lori Forsythe, is here to do a quick introduction on Darby. And Kara, if you wouldn't mind advancing the slide one, that would be great.
Perfect. Thank you, Jim and Kara. Welcome, everyone. As Jim mentioned, I work for Darby Dental, and many of you may be familiar with Darby, but what we have found is most people don't have the updated version of what we can do. We are absolutely supplies and gloves, but we are also equipment. We have a full line of capital equipment available for all of you, technology, software. We sell implant systems, education, compliance, and our newest addition is a company called OnDM. So several of you probably have some staffing issues currently. You need an assistant or a hygienist, not dentist yet, but the other two positions we can help you fill. So if you're short on staffing, you can either scan the QR code or you could reach out to darbydental.com online. Or if you're working with us, then reach out to your sales rep and they can give you more information about OnDM. But it's a service that will help you staff either temporarily or permanently your dental office. And we know a lot of people need that right now. So welcome everyone and enjoy Kara's presentation.
Enough here about CareStack and Darby. Let's turn it over to Kara Kelly, who's our presenter for tonight. And Kara, I think a great place for us to start is if you wouldn't mind giving your introduction about your background. And while that's going on, I'm just going to launch a quick poll so you have a better understanding of who our audience is. Is that okay with you?
Yeah, sounds great.
And these polls are all anonymous, by the way, then I'll shut up. So please answer candidly so we know who our audience is. Sorry, Kara, take it away, please.
No, you're perfect. Thank you, Jim. And thank you, CareStack and Darby, both for having me tonight. I've really enjoyed getting to meet you earlier this year, and I'm really excited about this tonight. It's a presentation that I've done a couple of times now, and it's getting to become one of my favorites. My name is Kara Kelly. I'm actually the CEO of Clinical HR, and so I have my disclosures listed here. The commercial support for the CE program is provided by CareStack and Darby, and the one tiny thing I'll add to that is that all of this tonight is information. It's not legal advice. I'm not an attorney, and I don't even play one on TV. And what's more is I'm not your attorney, and I'm not your advisor unless you've engaged me, and so if anybody has questions from the information that they hear tonight, I highly recommend finding an advisor that's in your state to ask those questions about your specific practice. And that is literally the basis of this entire presentation. I'm actually going to go back for a second here. I've been a dental HR consultant for over 10 years at this point. And a lot of what I have seen with people who ask questions on Facebook groups and say, hey, I have this employee that I'm upset with, or they've done this or they've done that, and what do I do? And you get information that comes back that's either flat out wrong or just really not a good practice, or it's not something that really fits the situation. And so I titled this Management Myths and Fateful Fallacies based on a lot of the myths that seem to be going around social media. And I like to use a picture of Stonehenge because Stonehenge is about 5,000 years old, which makes it only about half as old as what some of these myths are.
Hey, Kara, can I interrupt for 1 second? Let me tell you who your audience is. And
Sure.
Thank you for everyone's candor. We got a great turnout tonight. I want to give hygienists are in the house, Kara. 50% of your audience is hygiene.
Okay.
About 30% are dentists. And then front office is about 17%. Thank you, Anita. You're a dentist. Love it. Use the chat feature if you'd like. We'll monitor that. There's no one from the back office tonight, but that's okay. So we got hygiene and dentists as kind of the leading two categories.
Fair enough. And this is okay. This is obviously not something dental assistants are probably going to get a ton of value out of. It is definitely more on the leadership side, and that's who I typically work with, our practice leaders. But welcome, everyone. I hope you do get some value out of this. Let's go ahead and get started. I actually have a recent example of what I was talking about earlier of the questions that get asked in Facebook groups. And by recent, I mean like last night from a Facebook group of a dentist, a practice owner, posting that I am furious with my team because I just found out that my office manager who left me 18 months ago had told my team members that they could stay on the clock if they stay on the premises and work through lunch. Well, now I realize that my team has been staying clocked in for lunch the last 18 months or more, and I'm upset. What do I do? And of course, you're getting a lot of responses to that. The one that I think stands out to me was somebody saying, well, you should have them sign off for lunch breaks. If they're going to be working through lunch, you need to have them sign off for lunch breaks because you're going to get audited by DOL. I got audited. It was horrible and I had to pay, and the DOL sided with the employee. And, I tried to get on and say, hey, this is actually only a handful of states have lunch break laws. So for the states that don't have this, you don't actually have to do all of those things. And it was kind of a thing, but it was interesting. It was this example of right the night before I was delivering this presentation of here we go with employment law advice in Facebook groups. Yay! So much fun. So I've put the, just kind of, they're random, they're not in any particular order, but I do have a couple of different segments of what I like to talk about when I talk about management myths. And they're recruiting and onboarding, paying your people, and employee policies. And so we're going to hit on a few of those for each one of these sections, like I said, in no real particular order. The first one I want to talk about, and hey, this kind of fits right now, is recruiting and onboarding. I think what Lori just said about Darby and OnDM, this is something that everybody's struggling with right now. And so I see a lot of misinformation in social media groups on best ways to recruit and onboard. And the first one is job applicants should complete a DISC assessment or some other personality test before making an offer. That's how this presentation is going to be laid out. Just a quick housekeeping on that is that the myth is going to be on the screen, and then I'm going to tell you why it's a myth and what you should be doing instead. So there's not a whole lot on the screen to pay attention to. And if you're taking pictures of the screen, taking screenshots, these are the myths, not the actual correct information. Just FYI. So completing a DISC assessment. And I'll preface this by saying I'm actually a certified DISC facilitator for everything DISC Workplace. And this is not something that you want to use for the selection process. This Enneagram, if you're using Myers-Briggs, there's a lot of different personality assessments out there. And most of them are not what we call valid predictors of success. Therefore, if you're using these during your hiring process before you've actually made an offer, you could be potentially discriminating against certain candidates based on the results that come up. I love DISC. I love it whenever you use it with your team after the fact, after you bring them on. It's great to have that or any of these other ones. There's a lot of great ones out there, but there are only a few assessments that you really want to use prior to predictive index being one of them. And I don't have any affiliation with them, so nobody's making any money off of that. I'm just letting you know that whatever assessment you want to use, you want to make sure it is a valid predictor of success. I'm actually a fan of a pre-hire assessment, and we'll talk about this a little bit more later, but more of a skills test rather than a specific personality test, because it unfortunately will pigeonhole certain people into certain positions. If you say that your front desk person has to be bubbly and friendly and outgoing, well, no, not necessarily. Sometimes those people aren't as detail oriented. And so you really want to focus on whether or not the person can do the job versus their specific personality as classified by any one of these assessments. The second one is that younger employees will be entitled and less dependable. We've all heard about the millennials, right? Y'all realize that the oldest millennials are now like 40 and homeowners and stuff.
I know, isn't it crazy? Yeah.
It really is. I myself am a millennial. And I will tell you a story of a client I recently had who was, he had an employee who had called in. She had a little bit of history of attendance, and she called in on a Friday morning saying, hey, she was stuck in traffic and she was on her way, but she was going to be late. Okay, fine. 45 minutes later, the office manager sends her a text message, and she says, hey, it's been 45 minutes, what's your ETA? Nothing. A couple hours later, she sends her another text message, is everything okay at this point? And the employee just says no. So my client, the office manager, he's married to the dentist, and so he's the practice administrator, he calls her that afternoon and was like, hey, we never heard from you, what happened? Well, she just wasn't feeling well and decided to just go home. I was like, okay, you didn't call to let us know? No, I wasn't feeling well and I decided to go home. Well, that employee texts another employee that what really happened was she was a little PO'd that the office manager asked her ETA and decided to go have mimosas with her boyfriend instead of coming to work. Anybody want to drop in the chat and guess how old this employee sounds based on this story? And Jim, if you want to
Yeah,
read
well,
out further.
here's my thing. Like, I would have said millennial, but now I'm going to say this person was in their 50s.
Not quite. She is 45 years old, a 45-year-old dental assistant.
So that's Gen Xer, like me, right? I guess.
Basically, yes.
Okay. I mean, I wish I was 45, but
she sounds like a 22-year-old, right?
Yeah, totally, yes.
Totally
yes.
sounds like yes. And I mean, this is something that I'll always hear. Oh my gosh, how these younger people these days, kids these days, they just don't know. They don't understand. They have a sense of entitlement and they just show up late for work all the time and they're just terrible to work with and I don't want to hire any of them. Well, that's not entirely true. Some of us were actually had decent work ethic when we were in our 20s and then became the CEO at 30. So it does happen. Just like the fact that sometimes you get older employees who aren't where you think they should be professionally. So really, for one, you shouldn't be looking at age anyways. Age discrimination starts at age 40 at the federal level. And for two, it's not, again, a valid predictor of success because this person was 45. So the fact that people suck transcends generations. The fact that people can be awesome transcends generations. Don't use age as a determining factor whenever you're looking at hiring somebody. The next one is if a candidate asked about salary before the second interview, they're only in it for the money. I actually advise my clients to ask about salary expectations on a pre-screen call because it's a business decision for you. It's a business decision for them. Why are we waiting until we get 3 interviews in before we've decided that, oh, we're not even in the same ballpark, not even in the same city? We've got the Phillies playing the Astros and then you're over here in Philadelphia and they're about in Houston at that point. You're that far apart on salary. There's no point in wasting anyone's time. So for somebody to ask about salary, that's a reasonable question. And you as the business owner know what you're going to pay them, or at least know a range of what you're going to pay them. So why not just say it? Why not be transparent? Some states, very small handful, but it's growing. This movement is growing, are actually requiring you to be transparent about salary. Some job platforms are requiring you to put salary information on your job postings. Like I said, you know what you're going to pay, just go ahead and say it. But furthermore to the myth about this, if a candidate asks about salary, the other side of that is that some employers are still asking their candidates about salary, like what their previous salary history is. And then again, some states, that's not legal anymore. And so really, honestly, it doesn't matter what somebody else made somewhere else. They may have been overpaid. They could have been underpaid. They could have been underpaid for discriminatory reasons. You don't really want to use their salary history as an indicator of what you should be paying them. You want to look at market value. You want to look at what your budget is, and you want to look at what the value to the practice is when you're determining your salary range. And then just don't count it against the candidate if during the first interview they ask, because it's a reasonable question. It may not need to be the first question, but if they ask during the first interview, that's perfectly acceptable in my opinion. All right, working interviews. I don't know when this became a thing in dentistry. No other healthcare field does it to my knowledge, but working interviews are the best way to select a candidate. I'll tell you several things about working interviews. They're often done very, very poorly. They are rife with payment issues. I have practices that want to hand a gift card or just cut a check to the person performing the working interview. And if they're doing actual productive work for the practice, meaning they're working on a patient or they're answering phones and scheduling, then they're really acting as an employee, in which case they need to be paid as an employee. And so, the amount of time that somebody spends working for you isn't indicative of whether or not they're a contractor versus an employee. And if you're choosing to pay somebody, whether that's a temp directly or somebody doing a working interview, just flat out without actually withholding payroll taxes or doing an I-9 or a W-4 for them, then you may end up running afoul of the U.S. Department of Labor or the Department of Labor in your state. The second reason it can be a problem is HIPAA. If they haven't actually had the HIPAA training or you don't have them sign a HIPAA business agreement, then you are basically getting patient information in front of somebody who's not your employee, which is problematic in itself. Patient care and practice risk if the patient gets injured by this person working on them, or if, for example, you have somebody doing a working interview and they steal the patient's data, that can be a risk to the patient in itself. If that person gets injured, that's a workers' comp issue. And if they're not your employee, then they can't file for workers' comp. So what do you do in that case? And then the last one is that it doesn't guarantee results. And by that, I mean, I've had a practice recently who was trying to hire an ortho assistant. And they came in and she had to do a full day working interview. They paid her correctly. They had her sign the HIPAA agreement. She wasn't working directly on patients, but she was doing other things around the office. And they thought she did a good job and they hire her. And come to find out a couple of days later, she doesn't know how to take an impression. when they were doing the working interview, anytime an impression came up, she had one of the other dental assistants do it that she was working with. And they never found out that she did not actually know how to take an impression. So rather than doing a working interview, I alluded to it earlier, I prefer my clients to have a skills assessment that they have prepared for each position. For an assistant, for example, that would look like, having them set up a tray, having them set up a room, having them do an impression on a model or on you or on another team member who signed a waiver or on your spouse or whoever it is, having them actually do some work that you can check a box and say, yes, I know they know how to do it. Front desk, same thing. Have them pull up a dummy account. I'm sure CareStack has a training account for each practice. Is that right, Jim? Yeah. Have them pull up the training account and actually work through something. Have them read an EOB and tell you what that means. Have them work through the process of filing for insurance if that's what you do. Have them actually show you that they can do the job without actually having them do the job. Have them do a phone call, for example, a mock phone call with another employee calling in pretending to be a patient. There are plenty of ways to get the information that you want without running afoul of various laws that are listed here. Okay, the next one is the onboarding process. You've hired them now. You found the person that you want and you hired them, and hopefully they've shown up on day one, because that's been a problem too. Hopefully they've shown up on day one. The onboarding process starts, correct? Not in my world. I feel like the onboarding process needs to start day like -7, where you are reaching out to them and saying, hey, we're excited to have you here. Why don't you give us a few things, answer a few questions so that we can put you out on our social media and introduce you to patients and introduce you to the team so they know who you are. Get a headshot and have them, send that in, or a selfie or whatever it is they do nowadays. Get a selfie. Send them a box of your swag. You've got t-shirts, you've got mugs. Let them come on day one feeling like they are a part of the team. Have that all happen before the first day so that on the first day when they come in, you've got bagels at the morning huddle. Everybody knows this person's name. They really feel like they are welcomed in on part of the team. Rather than calling it the onboarding process, which I have to use because I'm HR and that's just our terminology, call it something like a welcoming process. Get rid of your probationary periods, which we'll talk about here in a minute anyway. Get rid of your probationary periods and call them welcome periods. Make this person feel like they're part of the team before they even get to the team. And you know what? They might be more likely to show up on day one. This one came up recently. A job candidate should disclose medical conditions that require accommodation during the interview process. Truthfully, Americans with Disabilities Act, which is my ADA, not your ADA. Your ADA is American Dental Association, so mine is Americans with Disabilities Act. It doesn't kick in until you have 15 employees in your entity, regardless of how many locations, 15 employees. But when it has 15 employees, that coverage starts on day one. So during the interview process, if they need an accommodation, you can certainly ask, do they need them? But they don't have to disclose that. And that goes for a lot of different types of accommodations that could be necessary. The incident that recently happened was I had a practice who had an employee that had been there for a couple of weeks, and she let the office manager know that she was a few months pregnant. Well, she would have known that at the time she was hired, and the office manager was just furious that this person did not tell her that she was pregnant whenever she was hired. But she doesn't have to. And quite honestly, if you look at it from the perspective of the employees, for the longest time, and by that I mean, the last many, many decades, if you told somebody you were pregnant in an interview, you ran the risk of not getting the job. And so people who have disabilities have been coached by the fact that employers have, mistreated them in this way. They've been coached not to disclose anything. So while it's unsettling and it's frustrating, there's reasons why they do it, and it's not something that you should be angry about in and of itself. It is something you want to work through, and if ADA applies to you at 15 employees or more, then you absolutely need to start the accommodation process with them, that interactive process. But they don't have to disclose anything like that during the interview stage. They don't have to disclose it ever, as long as it doesn't affect them, their job performance. Okay, I think we have a poll here, Jim.
You do,
How
yes.
many?
Yeah, do you want me to go on? Let me put that out there. Is that okay?
Yeah, go for it. Or do I need to do it?
Nope, I got it. And please, everybody, this is anonymous. We got a really good turnout. Look how many people are here, Kara. So
I know, my goodness, this is great.
Let's make sure you guys complete this. Come on.
It's actually a fantastic percentage of the people who signed up. Sometimes you'll get like 100 people sign up and 20 people show up.
That's right.
So this is amazing. Y'all are great. I'm kind of slightly baffled. Normally I don't have that many people who are super into employment law other than me, but I don't count.
That's because I hassle people. I send them 55 emails. I call them up at all hours, make sure they show up. I'm just kidding.
Absolutely.
But we're getting great turnout so far. And what we're seeing here, I'm going to end the poll in about another 10 seconds, but predominantly it's no.
I see that.
Yeah. Like 70% are saying no. 20% are around yes. 5% sometimes, and about 7% about just doing a Google search.
That doesn't terribly shock me.
Is that pretty representative of what you find across
Oh yeah,
your...
that's why I'm not shocked.
Okay.
I'm actually almost a little surprised that it's higher than 15% on the yeses. Congratulations. Or than sometimes. Yeah, we're gonna talk about that. We're gonna talk about the sometimes. We're really gonna talk about the no's and Google searches though.
Yes, go for it.
Okay, let me go ahead and clear my screen because it's still showing there. Okay, I don't need to conduct a background check on every candidate. Here's the thing about background checks. If you're going to do them for one, you really should be doing them for all, because that can open you up to discrimination claims that you might have only done a background check on somebody of a certain race or certain country of national origin. You might have only done it on females. So there are some positions, and in a dental practice, it's hard, especially the smaller practices, it's hard to justify this. But there are some that say maybe you do a background check on a certain subset of employees. But honestly, everybody needs to have a background check. Even the people who are not handling money, even the hygiene and the assistants in the back, they're there with your patient's belongings, your patient's purses and such in the back while your patient is, staring at the Netflix on the ceiling with sunglasses on. So you really want to be background checking everybody. And whenever you are doing them, you want to make sure that you're following what's called the Fair Credit Reporting Act, meaning whenever you run the background check, if something comes up, that the employee has the right to dispute that, or the job candidate has, hopefully they're not an employee, although I have a client that's doing that right now. Hopefully they're not an employee at that point. The job candidate has the right to dispute anything that comes up, because there are things that happen. I just ran one for a friend recently through White Pages, and my gosh, the things that come up on that, there was like multiple different like motorcycle helmet tickets and things that were not this person's at all. So make sure you're using a very solid background check service if you're going to use it. I'm actually a fan of Imperative Info or Good Hire, either one. They both do a good job. But you want to make sure that you're conducting it. And so do it on everybody. Make sure that you're going to do it prior to hire. You can make the job offer contingent upon hire, which you should do, especially if you're in a ban-the-box state or a ban-the-box city. So for example, I'm in Texas, which is not a ban-the-box state, but I'm in Central Texas, and Austin is a ban-the-box city. Ban-the-box meaning the box that they check that says they have a criminal history. You cannot legally perform a background check in those areas unless you have made an offer of employment. So you make your offer of employment, then you run the background check. You don't just start checking your top multiple candidates in those states, which is also a best practice in general, to be honest. Again, it prevents you from having discrimination issues. So you do that, you give them the chance to dispute any claims, because if they have identity theft or something else that's come up, you want to make sure that they have the opportunity to correct that or explain that. And then the other thing about them specifically is that you want to make sure that they are timely and relevant. And what that means is you are not just making some kind of blanket statement that says if you have a criminal history of 7 years at all, we're just not going to hire you. If they had a DUI from 5 years ago and they're a front desk person who's not doing any driving, that's not a relevant charge. If it was a forgery of instrument or some kind of theft charge and it was last year, that one's probably more relevant. That might be a reason that you just, disqualify that candidate. So make sure that it's timely and relevant to what the position is. Google searches. Google searches are not background checks. There's so many things that come up on a Google search, and I will give you a little preview of that. Fun fact: if you Google search my name spelled correctly with the correct number of E's and nothing else, you will get a Canadian author whose genre is erotic literature. She kind of looks like me, just a little bit. And oh, by the way, my HR Cara Kelly Facebook page and my LinkedIn are like 2 links under hers. Her most popular title is Dirty Daddies. If I ever write a book, I cannot have CaraKellyAuthor.com. Y'all, that's not me.
But look at those abs on Protecting Lou. I mean, that's...
I know.
My wife would buy that book in a heartbeat if she saw that.
I know. I figured I'd save y'all the work of trying to figure out how my name is spelled and how many E's are in it and just show you. But yeah, I mean, she's got dark hair and pale skin. It's kind of a blurry picture. You might actually be able to mistake her for me if you were squinting real close. That's not me. Really, seriously, not me. But this is what happens when you try to run Google searches on people. Okay. You get Dirty Daddies. And even if you do figure out that that's not me, do you really want to be thinking about dirty daddies when you're interviewing me? Probably not. If any of you said yes to that, we need to have a different conversation.
We are getting some questions though, and I want to encourage people. That's great.
Sure.
Put your questions up there. I think, Kara, let's park them because you're going a stupid clip here, and then we'll come back and we'll revisit them.
No
But
worries.
please ask your questions, and we'll make sure to address them.
Absolutely, will do. Okay, so that's a nice way to end recruiting and onboardings with dirty daddies. Good times. Now let's talk about paying your people. Hopefully not the dirty daddies. It is up to the team member to decide that whether or not they're an employee or a contractor. I see this one the most often with dental associates. I will occasionally see hygiene, depending on your state, that may or may not be valid, but dental associates tend to be the ones that they say, well, but the associate wanted to be a contractor. Okay, well, the associate isn't the one who ends up paying the IRS whenever they're misclassified, the practices. And I have actually sat through an IRS misclassification audit, which took about a year and many binders worth of printouts and paperwork and hours of time. And that alone should discourage you from misclassifying your employees. Worker classification is determined, typically by the IRS. There's like a 20-step form for this, SS8. And it's not 100% black and white. For the most part, however, anybody who's performing the business of the business is an employee. And that means if you are performing dental services, the person who comes in to actually do the dental services, whether it's part-time or full-time or however you structure that, that's an employee. They're using your team, they're presenting themselves as a member of your staff, it's your supplies, your patients, presumably. They are not walking off with them. There are a few times where that might change. If you have, for an example, an anesthesiologist who's coming in to do that function for surgeries, if you're a GP and you have endo who comes in twice a month to work with your patients, but they bring their own team and they're wearing their own uniform and they've got their own email address, they're not representing themselves as a member of your team, that person could be a 1099 contractor. But just because you have a contract in place does not make them a contractor. And it's not up to them to decide whether or not they are. Just FYI. Seen that go badly. And it ended up in about $142,000 back taxes owed and penalties for 1 year, the 1 year that was audited for the 13 misclassified dental associates.
Yeah.
Employees can be prohibited from discussing their pay. I do a lot of employee handbooks and I still see this one come up. Or what happens is they get an employee handbook from a reputable source and they decide to start making changes. I'm sure some of my clients have done the same thing. I tell them at the time that I send it to you, it's in the position that it's going to be. And if you want to make changes, that's on you. But that's one of the ones that most commonly gets in there. Or I will hear I'm not going to prohibit it, but could I discourage them from discussing their pay? No, you can't. There's something out there called the National Labor Relations Act, and it's managed by the National Labor Relations Board. And typically that applies to unions, but there are some things like discussing working conditions, which are considered concerted or protected activities for employees, all employees, regardless of whether or not they're part of a union. So you cannot prohibit your employees, non-exempt employees, some of your exempt or supervisor levels can be, but for the most part, most employees in a dental practice cannot be prohibited from discussing their pay. And that includes bonuses and everything else. All breaks are unpaid time regardless of length or reason. See, we just had this breaks conversation last night. I'm really up on the breaks laws here. All breaks are unpaid time is not true. For one, you have things like bathroom breaks that are 5-minute or so breaks that are required by OSHA that you cannot say they have to clock out for. Fair Labor Standards Act, which is the federal level and managed by DOL, FLSA, says that any break that is 20 minutes or less in length is a paid break. They do that on the clock. Now, you don't have to give them a paid break unless you're in a state that requires it, potentially. My state certainly doesn't, because we're Texas and we do that apparently here. But you can't just say you have to clock out for every single break. So if it's 20 minutes or less, if it's a quick meal break, or if it's a bathroom break, or if you're giving them the 15-minute morning break or 10-minute morning break, however that's structured, if it's 20 minutes or less is on the clock, regardless of where you are. The additional breaks that might be considered paid, depending on your state, could be lactation breaks, break times for nursing mothers, and different states have different laws on that, specifically the length of time that's allowed. That one's kind of fun. Maine, for example, has 3 years, whereas the federal is only 12 months, and Georgia has no time limit on it at all, just until the mother's done nursing. So it can vary, and you want to make sure that you are complying with whatever your state laws are whenever it comes to that. Meal breaks, it's one of the reasons I like to say meal breaks should be 30 minutes or longer rather than having that 20-minute, which could really vary if the person clocks in at 18 or 19 minutes. Technically that's under the 20. So if you make it 25, 30 or longer, you're a little bit more in the clear when it comes to that. Now, your state may require you to have a 30-minute specifically. So that's another thing you look at. But generally those are unpaid. The state's not going to require you to give them a paid lunch break unless it's 20 minutes or less. I can compensate employees with a gift card or a flat fee when they agree to a weekend on-call shift. That's it depends. Generally, you don't want to compensate anybody with a gift card because gift cards are not administratively impractical. They're not de minimis. Doesn't matter how much the gift card is. The IRS still says they're not administratively impractical to account for, so they do go to wages. So even if you give them a gift card or cut them a check, flat fee, something like that, at any point for any type of pay, bonuses, Christmas bonuses, those are coming up. That's still something that's supposed to go through payroll. If you want them to get the full amount of that bonus, it can be a grossed up bonus check run through payroll, and that's fine. Or if you want to be able to give them a tangible, like actual paper check, you can do that. But again, it goes through as an already paid out check in payroll. It all needs to end up on the W-2 at the end. The part about the on-call shift, however, there's two different types of pay when we're looking at this. We're looking at waiting to be engaged and engaged to wait. On-call pay is waiting to be engaged, meaning they're free to do whatever they want with their time until they're called to work. So until a patient calls in and they actually have to do the work and answer the questions or get this person on the schedule or whatever have you, then they're waiting to be engaged. You don't have to pay for the waiting time in that standpoint. You do have to pay for the time they actually spend working. So I'll have some practices that'll say, well, I just pay them for 1 hour so that they can be on call, or I just pay them a flat fee. I just pay them $100 to be on call for the weekend. If they do more work than what actually takes them up to that $100, so for example, say that they made $20 an hour and they spent 6 hours working, well, that should have been $120 and you've underpaid them. You could have a different rate for this, potentially, with weighted overtime calculations factored in. But either way, you want to make sure that they are clocking their time when they're on call, because it does actually count as compensable time. You can't just have them paid in a flat fee or a gift card or something along those lines, or a bonus. And I will actually add on bonuses as well. If you did something like that, that one would likely fall under a discretionary bonus versus some of the other types, which we call non-discretionary. The ones that you do where you say, if you make over a certain amount of revenue at the end of the month, we're going to give you a certain percentage of collections as a bonus. That's considered a non-discretionary bonus because it's something that they earn, which, by the way, has an overtime premium factored into it that nobody remembers to do. And I have had clients that have gotten dinged by DOL in the past because of that, because they failed to actually pay overtime premium on non-discretionary bonuses, which, by the way, would fall into potentially here with us on-call shift, depending on who you have doing it. So the quick answer to that would be either the dentist do it themselves or somebody who's an exempt employee, like an office manager or an associate, be the one who's actually taking the on-call, because then they basically make the same amount per week. Okay, employees who are paid a weekly salary do not need to clock in. So we talk about salary and hourly. Those are both pay mechanisms. What you really want to look at when it's time to clock in is whether or not they are exempt or non-exempt. And what we're talking about here with exemptions is that Fair Labor Standards Act, which says that employees have to be paid a minimum of time and a half for hours worked over 40. Some states have different rules on that. California, for example, if you're in California, it's like more than 8 hours in a day or 40 in a week. Not doubly though. So if they are not exempt from that law and that law does apply to them, then they need to be on the clock. So the practices that say, I just don't want anybody to clock in, I'm just going to pay everybody's salary and make it easy. Well, if they're working over 40 hours and you don't have any time clocks records to back that up, no timekeeping sheets, no nothing to back that up, and they go and say, hey, I've been working overtime and not getting paid for it, right, you're going to be on the hook for that. You're going to be liable for that. The ones who are able to be salaried are able to be exempt without any overtime pay. They typically have to make over a certain amount, which there's a federal threshold for that, and then it also varies by state. And they have to be in one of three categories for exemption, either professional exemption, administrative exemption, and I don't mean your front desk admin, I mean like your office manager who is managing 2 or more people with judgment and with higher firepower, disciplinary authority. Or the last one, they have to be somebody like HR who has a controlling interest of the business, an executive exemption, has some control over what happens in the business, even if they may not be managing somebody. So typically your dental associates and your office managers are the only ones who are able to truly be exempt in most of the smaller dental practices. If you're a DSO or larger group practice and you have corporate offices, that may differ. But either way, you should have them clock in if they're anybody who's not in those positions, because you want those time records, even if you're trying to pay a flat fee, because if they're salary non-exempt, you still owe them overtime at time and a half. Time spent in training courses or meetings can be unpaid if attendance is optional. I've heard this one for the last several years. There are 4 different things that you have to meet, 4 different standards you have to meet for something to be considered unpaid time. The non-mandated or optional attendance is only one of the 4. Here's the rest of the 4. Outside normal business hours, it is voluntary, it is not job related, which is what most people end up having a problem with, and then no other work is concurrently being performed. So that course you're taking them to on the weekend, if it's for dental related information, it's job related, even if they volunteer for it, even if you're paying for the course and the travel and the hotel and all the meals, they're there, they're doing work because it's job related training. The lunch and learns, when somebody's bringing in a product for them to take a look at and demo, that's job related. Yes, you would have to pay them for that time, even if it's not your lunch and learn. And so that's one of the things that I see so very many times. There have been some opinion letters based on a couple of different other healthcare professions that DOL has implemented in the last couple of years, about the last into 2020 and 2021. However, I have actually personally talked to a federal investigator for Department of Labor, and they specifically told me that opinion letters are not changes in the law and that this is still correct. And so you still want to follow this unless you're inclined to go get yourself an opinion letter.
Kara, this came up probably a lot during the heart of the pandemic, right? When offices were closed and
yes,
and principals of dental practices were asking their employees to do training, right? I'm sure this came up a lot.
It did. It's also come up for years, quite honestly, because everybody thinks that because they pay for that course, that, state ADA course, that they don't have to pay for the time just because the employee agrees to not be paid. And that's not correct. And the employee is not going to be the one in trouble for not paying. They will be. All right, employee policies. This is our last little section, and I think we should be able to get through this relatively quickly so we can get to the questions that I see popping up. The first one is, this is a right to work state, so I can discipline and fire employees for any reason. I love this one. It makes me so happy. Right to work is not the correct terminology that you're typically using. You may be in a right to work state. About half the states are right to work. But what that really means is that the employee has the right to work in a position without joining a union if a union's involved. That's not the case for most dental practices, but I keep seeing this, oh my gosh, this is a right to work state, you can fire them for any reason. What you're looking at is this is an at-will state, which like 48, 49 of the states are at-will states. I think Montana is the only one that's not. So that's an at-will state that we're looking at. And on top of that, the other side of this myth does not mean that you can fire them for any reason. It means you can fire them for any reason that's not an illegal one. So you can't fire them for anything that's a Title VII protected class, which you should have that statement in your employee handbook. You can't fire them for being pregnant. You can't fire them, for a certain skin color or a certain religious practice or something like that. And in certain states, you can't fire them for certain political views or sexual orientation. So you want to make sure that you're pretty clear on what that means in your state, and use the right terminology of at will. If I terminate an employee during their 90-day probationary period, and I've already told you all I hate that word, probationary period, I won't have to pay unemployment benefits. Listen, if you've hired the employee for 2 hours, 2 days, 2 years, 2 weeks, it doesn't matter. They're still your employee. And so while if you terminate within the 90-day period, they go and file, you may not be considered an employer in the base period. If they get another job and lose that job and file again, you may be in the base period at that point. What that looks like here is the actual calculation for base period. Department of Laborers are going to look at the previous 5 quarters from when the employee files, and they will take the earliest 4 of those 5, and that's what's typically counted as the base period. So that's where this 90-day myth came into play, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're off the hook and that you can just fire them for any reason, because it'll never come back to bite you. You should treat anybody the same way that if you're doing a termination, where you have appropriate documentation, you have, a solid reason that'll actually stand up to unemployment or stand up to a court if need be. Even in an at-will state, sure, you can just say, hey, it's not a good fit, it's not working out, and that's fine, but that does not hold up very well in an unemployment case, believe me. I should document every performance problem and respond to unemployment claims with every reason I've ever had to terminate the employee. I had a client, actually there were 2 clients, it was a husband and wife, and they both had their own practice. One was a prosto and one was a pedo. And they had an employee handbook that I had worked with on the prosto. And so that was the husband. Well, the wife had had an issue with one of her employees filing for unemployment, and she had lost her hearing and was asking if I could help. I said, well, probably not at this point, but go ahead and send me what you sent them. Send me your handbook and send me the documentation you sent them. See if I could come up with a Hail Mary pass. Well, I pulled it up, and the handbook, for one, would have been a perfectly solid handbook to terminate this person off of, because it was mine that they had taken the husband's and put the wife's name in. So I knew that the handbook was good. But the list of reasons that she had fired this person, there were like 9 of them, and 2 of them weren't even legal. The unemployment offices, the attorneys that work there for those hearings, do not want to see 16 different reasons why you're firing this person and everything this person's ever done wrong. They want one good, solid incident of why you terminated this person. You may have had some other things. You may find things out afterward. They don't care. They want to know what the one firing incident is going to be. That's your best chance of winning an unemployment case, is to have that one good, solid incident with documentation to back it up, to show that that person was warned that they would be fired, that they are not surprised that they were fired. And it's not for all the reasons all the time. Documentation is written to be read by the practice and the employee. The myth here is that I will always tell people documentation is not for you. It's not for your employee. It's not for the practice as a whole. It's not for your patients. And you know this whenever you're doing documentation for notes, for your patient notes. It's written to be read by the jury, who has to hear it in 3 to 5 years. Anything that you write should be fact-based, should be unemotional, which was this case that I was looking at last night, the questions in the Facebook last night, which is, I'm so furious with my team. And all of the people there, oh my gosh, your team is screwing you over, and this and this and that. And I'm like, I can imagine what write-ups would look like from these people, because they would just be full of emotional this and that. And that doesn't really hold up very well. And it doesn't make you look very good as a practice. So very fact-based, tell what actually happened, make it relevant, and make it sound like something you could read in front of a jury, whether that's patient notes or employee notes. I should require a doctor's note for every sick day taken for it to be considered an excused absence. Doctor's notes are good sometimes when you've got somebody who's abusing. However, 2 different reasons why this is a myth, or why this shouldn't be done, not a best practice, is for one, if you're in a state that has a mandated sick leave, a lot of those states have rules that say that you cannot require a doctor's note if they're using that paid leave, that state required leave, for like 3 days. If at all. Some of them will say can't require it at all, but at least not before 3 days. The second reason on this is because presumably we've hired adults, and adults shouldn't have to go drag themselves to the doctor to get a note because they've got a stomach bug or a migraine. So, trust your employees to some extent if they're just taking sick days, and this is a person that's a high performer. If they happen to be calling in every Monday or every Friday before a holiday weekend or something like that, and you're not in a state that has a rule against it, maybe. If it's going to be longer than 3 days, fine. If you're going to be having paid leave for it and you're in a state that requires it, don't do it. If it didn't happen on the clock, it is not my problem. I had this happen last year with somebody who was dealing with a sexual harassment case. And what was happening was one employee was texting another off the clock and was sending them harassing messages. And the employer was like, I don't want to deal with this. They're not doing it at work. They're doing it off the clock. Well, that person is your employee. They're feeling uncomfortable at work. This person has been harassing them. They do have to work together. It can very well be your problem. And that goes for quite a few things too. When you're talking about, for example, social media use, if somebody's posting racist tweets, for example, I have had people fired over that. Freedom of speech applies to government censorship. It doesn't mean you can say and do whatever you want at any time. So there are times where off the clock behavior can impact their work performance, and it could very well end up being your problem. Jim, I think we have our last poll here.
Let me go ahead and launch that. Sounds good.
Sure. The annual performance review is the time to give feedback to employees. Who conducts the annual performance review, or how often are you conducting performance reviews?
So let's see if we get 100% of the audience to complete this participation-wise. We'll give it about 40 seconds here, Kara, if that's okay. And Kara, just to give you a heads up, we probably have about another 5 or 6 minutes until we get to the Q&A.
I'm almost done.
For you. Okay.
Start on time and end on time. See, what you should tell them is that they don't get CE credit if they don't actually vote. And then all of a sudden participation skyrockets.
It'll be 100%, right? So leading the pack here is annually about 50%.
Yeah.
Quarterly, and when I get around to it, are about 15% each. And then unfortunately, 18% are never.
All right, fair enough. Probably about where I would have expected it to be. I am not a fan of the annual performance review. And the reason is, actually there's several reasons, but the first reason is that feedback should be given on an ongoing, as needed, continual basis. You should not wait until that once a year period for you to tell an employee that there's something that needs to be changed or that they're doing a great job on the positive side of it. Typically when that annual performance review comes around, you remember the bad things that happened in the last 30 to 90 days, and nobody wants to do it. Nobody wants to hear that. That's not helpful to anyone. You hate doing them. The employees hate doing them. The other reason I don't like it so much is that it tends to be tied to raises. And so if you want to kind of get rid of that stigma that, hey, the annual performance review is here and it's time for me to get a raise, I like to recommend doing them quarterly. You're having a huddle with everybody pretty much daily, and so weekly might be a little much, but quarterly, you should be able to sit down with the team member, 15, 20 minutes tops, quarterly, and discuss their performance and their goals. That's my sweet spot, I feel, for dentistry. I actually have a resource here. If you scan this QR code, and if you don't, I can send it to you afterward. I'll drop my email in the chat at the end of this, and I can just email it to you. But it's a performance development packet. I don't like to review the performance. I like to develop it. Reviewing is retroactively, developing is proactive. And so what this particular tool is a one-page dashboard for you to rank them on things that you typically are going to score for a performance evaluation. But there's also a section for them to set goals for themselves and you to set goals for them. And to take a look, did they accomplish the goals in the last 90 days? Great. What are the goals for the next 90 days? And make this an ongoing cycle. The second page to this packet is actually a worksheet for them to complete prior to it so that they don't get there for their 15 minutes conversation and they're like, I don't know. They actually have time to think through, hey, what are some of the things I've accomplished? So that's a little freebie for y'all. Like I said, it downloads as a Word document, and if you need it, just email me and I'll send it to you. The very last one that I have here, see, I told you we'd be on time. Employees leave their jobs for a bigger paycheck. Maybe, sometimes, if you're paying under market value. However, Gallup, which is the company that researches all things work, they're actually the Clifton Strengths Finder people, or it's called Strength Finder now. It used to be called Clifton Strengths. They've done research and they've said that 70% of their employees leave, of employees in the country leave because of the manager, because of practice leadership, the business leadership. It's not just to go find a bigger paycheck. People will actually take pay cuts to go work in a better culture. So if you really want to figure out a way to retain your employees, yeah, you need to be paying competitive wages and market value, but most of your employees value the culture of your practice more than they value the paycheck that comes at the end of the pay. And I'll have a resource for that as well. But I want to go ahead and put my information up there so that you have it, so that I know we can get to our Q&A portion. And see, we are right on time.
Oh,
Jim.
Kara, yeah, this is great. I mean, so much good information. And I'm picking up like 3 or 4 pearls that I wasn't aware of, like just going into.
Good,
thank you
perfect.
for the education. Really appreciate it.
Sure.
Is this the best way for people to reach you, by text or by email? What do you prefer?
Either way, this is my cell, and so you're welcome to text. If you want to have a longer conversation, you can email me, or if you text me, I'll send you my scheduling link, and you're welcome to go ahead and set up an initial consult. I don't charge for those. I just have a conversation with you and see kind of where your problems are. If it's a quick question, I happily answer it, and if it's something else, then we'll talk about how I could best serve your practice. I did what was supposed to have been an article, and then I hit about 3,000 words, and I'm like, this is the longest blog post in the history of ever. So I went ahead and turned it into an ebook, and it's 22 things dental practices should stop doing in 2022 and 5 they should start to compete with culture. And yes, I'll update it for 2023, but in the moment, here's the 22 things that you should stop doing and a few things you should start if you want that culture piece. You want that positive culture that will retain employees better than a paycheck.
Awesome. Thank you for sharing that. So let's go through a couple of these questions. Someone raised their hand. It takes a master of Zoom webinar to basically open up your microphone so you can ask the question, and I'm not capable of that. So please go ahead and type the question in there and we'll address it. So the first question is from anonymous attendee. What kind of questions are they not allowed to ask you in an interview? It's a 2-part question. So why don't we tackle that first? And I don't know if that's coming from the perspective of the.
I know what they're talking about.
Okay, you go for it. Fire away.
So here's the thing. It's actually kind of a misconception to say that you're not allowed to ask certain questions. What's not allowed is for you to use the information from certain questions in your hiring and job related decisions. So for example, asking somebody if they're married or if they have children, it's generally a good rule of thumb not to, because then you don't end up with a potential discrimination claim. Asking somebody how old they are or when they graduated high school, those are another ones you can kind of get at.
Yes, that's.
Yeah,
I had someone I used to work with who would drive me nuts. I would ask that question. I'd be like, "Hey, Tom, you can't ask that." Well, he's like, "Well, I'm not asking them, how old they are." I'm like, "Tom, they graduate high school when they're 17, 18, maybe 19. Like, it's not like they're 35."
Usually, yes, correct. And so it's, unless your state has a specific rule, it's generally not illegal to ask that question. It's just illegal to use that information. And because it opens you up for liability for a discrimination claim, there's just no point to asking it. And that goes for
the second part to the question, Kara. Can the DDS not pay the person who works a full day working on patients or on a working interview?
If they're working on patients, they need to be paid. It's productive work and they should be paid as an employee. If you do something like a skills assessment and limit it to 1 to 2 hours, then no, it's basically an interview. You don't have to pay for that time. It's another reason I love skills assessments. But yeah, if you have them come in and actually work on patients, you need to have them set up as an employee. Now, I mean, you can pay the minimum wage, whatever that is in your state or your area. Some cities have higher minimum wages, but it has to be at least minimum wage.
Great, thank you. Here's from Jackie, a fellow Texan. Texas is in the house.
Woo.
Does the employee need to pay vacation days earned if you quit your job in Texas?
In Texas, no, you don't have to pay out. As long as your handbook doesn't say something to that effect, handbook or the offer letter or some other policy that you have written somewhere, you have to abide by whatever your policies are, but you don't have to have a policy that allows that. Some states will. Texas is not one of them.
Great, thank you, Kara. From another participant, like if you had one pearl that you'd want to implement in your practice, like starting tomorrow, from your training today, like what is the one thing you'd emphasize that practices make sure that they implement, post taking this course today?
The very last one, the culture piece, focusing on building yourself a positive culture that's going to attract and retain good team members. I think it's been one of the biggest issues in dentistry lately. All of these other things matter, of course, but having great people who are part of your team that have a shared philosophy that are in alignment with your vision is 100% more critical than anything else that's here. I believe anyway. And so focusing on that, focusing on the fact that they're not just leaving for a paycheck and not having that attitude that they're just leaving for a paycheck. I think that carries over to other team members as well. That and some of the other negative attitudes that I've encountered over the last 10 years or so. I feel like your team will get that vibe and your culture may not be as great as you think it is when that happens. So I would really focus on making sure that your culture is a great one from the employee's perspective. Buying them pizza on Fridays does not make up for not paying market value, but making it a place where they really want to be and want to work and they feel like they're appreciated is, I think, 100%.
Well put. Definitely. How do I find out what my state requirements are for breaks?
I actually just posted this earlier today. I can drop it in the chat. No, I can't because it was on my phone. Generally, you can actually search the Department of Labor's website. If you Google literally, and normally I won't tell you to do this, but if you Google whatever your state is in meal break law, it'll likely come up. Make sure you're getting it from a reputable source, which is either an attorney's website or your state Department of Labor's website. And it'll come up and it'll tell you what your break laws are. Only not even half the states have a meal break requirement.
Great. Someone asked for you to put up the scan for the culture booklet again. Do you mind rewinding that slide? And I have a last question here. And then I know, Sophia, you want that code. You're here for the code. We'll give you the code. I don't want to hold you back from your code. Okay. Can an employer, this is from Sean, can an employer choose to not pay for national holidays?
There's no state or federal law that requires you to pay for national holidays. No, you can choose not to. I will say that if we're looking at this culture piece, anytime your practice is closed and they don't have the opportunity to make up that payroll, Merry Christmas, you're getting a pay cut is not really going to improve that practice culture. So while it's not a requirement, I would at least consider, the basic standard 6 if you possibly can, because it costs you less in the long run than turnover.
Come on, Sean, you got to work on that culture. You don't want to pay You don't pay for Christmas or New Year's Day? Boo.
I mean,
right?
I have some that are, they're Peter practices, and so they're open on, some of the Monday holidays because that's when the kids are out of school. And so maybe they only pay for 4. But if you're giving ample PTO, I mean, you could tell them they could use their PTO for the holidays, I suppose. But if you're only giving them 3 to 5 days that first year and you're not going to give any paid holidays, you're going to find it pretty difficult to attract and retain talent. Especially because nowadays you're not just competing with the dental practices down the street, you're competing with the large corporations who are offering them more per hour than you're paying to be able to work from home with full benefits. So you have to take a look at it from that perspective of your competition for employee talent is not just in the dentistry world.
Yeah, well put. Thank you for emphasizing that. Okay, last question, Kara. I think we're at a good kind of point here, and then we'll offer up the CE code. If my state doesn't have a paid sick leave policy, can I require a doctor's note?
You can. Like I said, though, I would wait until they're going to be out for more than just one day, unless they are somebody who habitually abuses the policy, just because from that culture piece, we tend to work with adults, or we'd like to work with adults. And so requiring them to go to the doctor and pay the copay, especially if you're a practice that doesn't offer health insurance, pay out full for the copay just to get a doctor's note because they had allergies or a migraine or something like that, that's not going to be ideal. But if you're asking can you? Yes, you can. Whenever I look at anything employment law related, though, I look at the things you have to do, the things that you cannot do, and the things you can do but probably shouldn't. And a lot of things fall into that middle bucket. And to me, this is one of those.
Thank you. And then we have one last request for your contact information. And then I'm going to grab the presentation rights back for you here.
Okay.
And in a moment.
I'll drop it in the chat too.
Yeah. The best way, again, to stay in touch with Kara is either email her or text her at this number. Regarding our future CE courses at CareStack, we ask that you join our Facebook group, CareStack Champions, to learn more about what our upcoming programs are that we have here in November and December. Kara, thank you for a great program. Dan, Janita, appreciate it. Take care, everyone. We hope to see you in our next program. Have a great night.
Thank you, Kara. Thank you, Jim.
You are.
Have a great evening.
Cheers. Bye-bye.